All right, so let's go ahead and start with a word problem. So in a moment, the word problem is going to be posted and I'm going to recite it. Please go ahead and write it down, or at the very least, take notes on anything that seems important. A farmer notices a linear relationship between the number of bean stalks planted per square yard, N, and the yield of each stalk in ounces of beans, Y. When there are 32 stalks planted per square yard, the yield is 30 ounces of beans per stalk. When 36 stalks are planted per square yard, the yield is 28 ounces of beans per stalk. Find the yield per stalk Y as a linear function of the number of stalks per square yard, N. B. What is the yield per stalk when 46 stalks are planted per square yard? C. How many stalks were planted per square yard if the yield is 15 ounces per stalk? Okay, so hopefully you've written down the problem and you've thought about it for a minute. So once you write it down, that gives your brain some time to process what's going on. The goal is not to do this quickly. The goal is to get through the process as correctly and clearly as possible. So the picture you should have in your head is that there's some farmer growing some beans. And if you read the problem, it talks about he's planting a certain number of stalks per square yard, which means that he is like each square yard, he's planting a certain number of stalks of beans, and out of those stalks, a certain number of beans grows that he can yield. Okay? So if we think about that, his goal sort of at the end of the day is to figure out how many beans he gets depending on how densely he plants his bean stalks. So once we got that picture in our head, we notice that he gives us the variables and gives us the information we need. And in fact, if you highlighted the math keyword of linear relationship, you're already most of the way there. So let's go ahead and let's build our dictionary first. So our dictionary first is we need to get an idea of what n is. So I'm going to use the semicolon equals to refer to like the name of what it is. So this is the number of stalks per yard squared. So now I wrote that down, and so anytime I see n, I know it's related to the number of stalks that are planted per square yard, and anytime I want to say number of stalks planted per square yard, I go back to n. Similarly, y is the yield per stalk of beans in ounces. So OZ is short for ounces. So anytime I talk about the yield per stalk, that is the number of beans I get per bean stalk, I'm going to use the Y for that. And likewise, anytime I see Y, that's related to the yield per beanstalk. Now, if you read the rest of the question, it tells us some information. It says that when there are 32 stalks planted per square yard, the yield is 30 ounces per stalk. So it says 32 stalks planted per square yard, so that's going to be our Y. So when Y equals 36, our N, when our N is 36, right? 36, okay. So I accidentally read the second sentence and bit of information first. And so it's even hard to keep this juggled in your head when you're a mathematics professor. So let's just go ahead and let's just grab what we wrote down and read it very carefully and write down the information as carefully as we can. It's very easy to make mistakes in the early part of a word problem. So let's read this. Second sentence. When there are 32 stalks planted per square yard, so number of stalks planted per square yard, that's the n. So when n is equal to 32, the yield is 30 ounces of beans per stalk. That's my y. So y is equal to 30. When 36 stalks are planted per square yard, so in that case, stalks planted per square yard is going to be n. Then the yield is going to be 28 ounces. It is really crucial that you write down the information correctly. Otherwise, everything you do beyond this point could be incorrect and wrong. And it's okay to get flustered. We all try to rush through this as fast as we can, and that's not the point. So I got flustered for a second. Let's just keep going. So we have this information now. And we've written it down. And the only other thing that we haven't written down is the math of it is the farmer says he notices a linear relationship. So linear, that usually refers to something looking like a line. And if you recall, if we're looking at the equation for a line, that's y equals mx plus b, if we're doing it in slope-intercept form, or y minus y1 is equal to m times x minus x1 if we do this in point-slope form. Okay. So let's go ahead and let's do the parts of the question. This is all the information gleaned out. So the first thing we need to do is we need to find the yield per stalk as a linear function of the number of stalks per square yard n. So what that's asking us to do is find the function y of n, where this is in function notation, where the output is the yield and the input is the number of stalks per square yard. Now, if we look at this, we want to do this in a linear relationship. So we want to find y as a function of n, and we want to do that as a line. So we want to use one of these equations right here. I'm going to use this point-slope form. So the y stays the same because it's still our output, but you notice instead of using the x, we're going to use an n. That's okay. These letters are just representing something. X is just the general variable that we use to represent numbers, and in this case, we want to put extra meaning on that. That is n, the number of yards planted, or number of stalks planted per square yard. So that means we're going to look for something of the form y minus y1 is equal to m times, we're going to replace that x. Okay? And if we solve this correctly and solve for this line, we will solve part A. So what next we need to do is we need to turn this into points. So if you notice that n is our analog for x, so this is saying that the line goes through the point 32, 30. And this is telling us we go through the point 36, 28. All right. Now, if we're going to use this point, these 2 points, we want to first find the slope. So slope is going to be the change in the outputs over the change in the inputs. And if I look at that, that's going to give me minus 2 over 4, and that's equal to negative 1/2. Now what I can do is take that slope, plug it in here, and then plug in one of these points. And if I look at that, I will get y minus, so y1, so 30 was the yield, so I'm going to put 30, equal to, our m is negative 1/2 times n minus, which one do we put? We use 30, so we subtract 32. And then if we move the 30 over, we get y is equal to negative 1/2 times n. And then we add 30, and if we have negative 1/2 minus 32, that's going to be plus 16, so it's going to be plus 46. Okay. Okay, so we found part A, which shows that the yield as a function of the number of stalks planted per square yard is equal to negative 1/2 the number of stalks planted per square yard plus 46. Now we're going to solve part B and C of this problem. So part B asks us, what is the yield per stalk when 46 stalks are planted per square yard? So it says, what is the yield per stalk? So what is the yield? So what is y? When 46 stalks are planted per square yard. So when the number of stalks planted per square yard is 46. So by leaving our dictionary and by carefully sort of translating the terms that the farmer would understand into these variables, we now see what we need to do. What is y when n is 46? Well, what should we do? We substitute n for 46 for n, and then if we calculate that, that should give us the y. So to do that, we just substitute it in. Half of 46 is 23. And so then we have 46 minus 23, that'll just give us 23. So if we're getting, if we plant 46 stalks per square yard, then that means that we should get about 23 ounces of beans per stalk. So let's go ahead and let's do part C in the same way. I'm going to let you guys pause the video for a second, try to do this on your own, and then I'll show you how to do it. All right, so for part C, it asks us how many stalks were planted per square yard if the yield is 15 ounces per stalk. So how many stalks were planted per square yard? That's going to be N. So what is N? If the yield is 15 ounces per stalk. So the yield is 15 ounces per stalk. So now we can do the same process. We substitute 15 for Y. And we solve for N. So if we're going to solve for N, let's move that to the left and 15 over to the right by subtracting 15 from both sides and adding 1/2 N to both sides. We have a 1/2 N left over on the left side, and then we have 46 minus 15, that's going to be 31. And now what we do is we multiply both sides by 2, and we get that N is equal to 62. So if we plant 62 stalks per square yard, we get 15 ounces of beans per stalk. Or if we looked at it and we said we got 15 ounces of beans per stalk, then we got 62. Then that means we planted at a density of 62 stalks per yard. And that's just one of the ways, one of the word problems that you can do. Build yourself a dictionary. Translate all the information that you can into the mathematical dictionary, and then translate the questions as best you can into math type problems.